Welcome to Business Chat, a platform dedicated to small medium enterprises, freelancers, and startups. My name is Paul Capelli, and I'm your host today. In Business Chat, we're talking about all the aspects of business, from sales to marketing to administration. Today, we have a chat with Rich Wasti. Rich is the owner and founder of Two Way Accountants, an accountancy firm based in South London who specializes in small medium enterprises, freelancers, and startups. Today we'll talk about invoicing, probably the most important document we have in our company. Let's go and see what advice Riz has to give us. So today we have again the pleasure to speak to Riz. How are you, Riz?
I'm good, Paul. Thank you. Good to be here again.
How is your life again in the lockdown period?
Lockdown is the same old, just unable to get my hair cut, but otherwise, we're trying to keep it normal, working from home, just going out for exercise, etc.
I see. And I wanted to ask you this, what is the most common thing that people are asking, that your clients are asking in these days?
At this point, there were quite a few new questions with regards to government packages on COVID-19 grants and support. So we dealt with that a lot. Other than that, because the tax year has ended and many companies have a financial year end March, that has ended as well. So we're just busy with our normal work.
I see. So you never have a rest, even in everybody is locking down.
Yeah, not that much rest.
I see. So Riz, I wanted to talk to you today about invoicing, because I was thinking that is a very, maybe not very sought after topic about administration, but it's very, very important. So can you tell us a little bit what are the most important thing about invoice? Basically, why not explain it to us a little bit about the structure of an invoice, and then maybe we go through all the details a little bit.
Sure. So invoice is your company's or your business's official document. So it is very important document. So what I'll do, I'll explain a little bit about the structure of an invoice, and then I can welcome questions from yourself. So, you have to be very careful with invoices, because not only that it's official record for your own business, also the buyer of your services or goods keep that document as their record. And in future, it can be looked at by their auditors or HMRC when they are checking something on your client's accounts. So it's an important document that is kept for a very long time by either parties. So now talking about the structure of an invoice. So I'll talk about some common mistakes and what are the basics to put on an invoice. So sometimes we have noticed that people will send a document as an invoice, but the document itself doesn't state invoice on it. So whenever the invoice is prepared, you must have the title invoice somewhere on the document. Even if it's a digital document, it should state invoice. The second important thing is the date of the invoice. You should have invoice date. You can also have a due date if you have offered some credit terms. Then you also should have address and details of the person you're sending the invoice to. You should have your own company details, your company name, number, address, VAT number if you're a VAT registered business. Then you also should have details of what you have sold, the description of the items you have sold, whether it's services or goods, quantity, the rate, the net amount plus VAT, and then the gross amount outstanding. And it's also useful to put your own bank details so that the buyer is able to pay you. So these are some basic details that you must have on your invoice. So one thing, sorry, I'm forgetting, invoice number. That's one of the key things to have, is invoice reference and invoice numbers. And these numbers should be in sequence, because each document is a proof of that specific transaction that took place between you and your buyer. and this document should have a unique reference number as well. So later in, months later, if someone wants to check this transaction, it should be easy enough to go back and find the source document.
Yeah, it seems quite clear. The one question I will have is, do you need to do it with a software specifically, or can you actually write your invoice, create your invoice in a Word document or in an Excel document?
Yeah, you can do either. It's fine to have Word documents, but it does become more manual job. So you need to have a good procedures and systems in place so that each document is not edited later. It shouldn't change. It should, once you have sent an invoice out to someone, their copy and your copy should not change. And there are reasons for that. I can go into detail later for that. So answer to your question is that's fine if you want to use an Excel format or Word format, but it will be easier if you use software. Because when you're using software, you'll be much more consistent. You set up the logo and addresses and everything in your software, then each and every transaction invoice will be consistent. And the second advantage is once you're using software and accounting software, you only enter data once, and the software will put it in sales ledger for you. So it reduces your workload, because if you're using Word documents, at some point later you'll have to put the data on a software, or you'll need to calculate your sales invoices, but the software can do it for you.
When do you have to add the 20% VAT, or better, who has to add the 20% VAT?
So that's an interesting question, because we have come across people who have just started a business and they ask us this question of adding VAT on their invoice. And then we'll have to go back and ask them, have you registered for VAT? Because if you're not registered for VAT, then you're not allowed to add VAT on your invoices. So that needs to be very clear to anyone who raises a sales invoice. If they're not VAT registered, they cannot add VAT on their invoice.
I see. And what happens if somebody pays me, for example, cash on hand the time I'm doing the service? Do I have to bill them later?
Yeah, so it does happen when you are trading with people, and especially if you know people. They can pay you for your services in advance, or they know that they've got service from you. Maybe they already have your bank details. They paid you for the service. You must create invoices for your own records as well as for them and send it to them, because sooner or later they will come back to you asking for an invoice if they haven't asked yet, because maybe their auditors are checking, or maybe someone checks and then they'll say, okay, where is the document for this payment? So if nobody has asked you, that doesn't mean that you don't have to send. You should still keep your records good, raise an invoice and send it to them, and because you need to match payment to your invoice as well anyway.
I see. And what happens when you have actually a mistake, or maybe a client complain, you have to basically modify the invoice, put a discount, whatever. What happened then? You have to create a new invoice, or you can actually edit the invoice you issued?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Some people tend to just change the invoice and send it again. It's a very risky thing to do, and it's not good practice. In fact, to do it properly, once an official invoice is raised and sent and received by your customer, now this does become an official document, and it needs to have a unique reference number. If you have to make an amendment or changes, the proper way of doing it is issue a credit note, which is a reverse of an invoice. So the credit note will settle with the original invoice, and then you raise a new invoice with proper details. Because if you don't do that, the risk is that there could be two different invoices floating around in your company or their company, and with the same invoice number, so which will look very inconsistent, and questions can be raised by HMRC. But I'll tell you a short story about why the unique reference numbers are important and why it is important to have sequences. So many years ago, once a business had a VAT inspection, and so VAT returns are done on a quarterly basis, and you give details of the sales and the expenses and calculate how much VAT is due to pay to HMRC. So the VAT inspector asked for all the backup details of VAT return. So for example, January to March, we give them everything for the VAT return, all the sales invoices, all the expenses, and they looked at it. It was all adding up, so it was all fine. And then they also looked at the next quarter for April to June, and all the sales invoices and expenses were there. But then the HMRC officer was able to detect that some sales invoices were not included in the VAT return. How did he manage to find that? Because of the sequence number. So he said, if, for example, your sales invoices in January started with number 1, and in June you had issued 1,000 sales invoices, or the last invoice number was 1,000, he would expect to see 1,000 sales invoices, but he saw that some invoices were missing, right? And so then they find out that some invoices were not recorded in the system. So it wasn't a deliberate thing, but it was a mistake, which was resulting in HMRC losing out their VAT amount. And mistakes can happen. So what happens often in January, you can write a date incorrectly. Instead of 2020, you may still write 2019, which means that when you put together all the invoices for 2020, you might have missed out that invoice. But when the invoices are in sequence number, issues like these can be detected. So yeah, there are a number of reasons why certain procedures are in place, and you do have to add raise invoices with a sequenced invoice number.
Brilliant. And what type of a fine can you get actually from HMRC?
So that really depends. HMRC has a whole system of how they raise penalties. Sometimes it depends on the negligence level. Sometimes it depends on if they think it was a deliberate attempt. But usually, if you find an error yourself first and you disclose it, then you can get away with no penalty or very minimum interest to pay for the loss of revenue for end revenue.
I see. So let's see if you can actually sum it up. So again, the invoices need to have invoice on the proper invoice, right?
Yeah.
Let's see if I remember actually well. So number, they need to be consecutive and need to change the year after, need to change number, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So payment terms, have we spoke about payment terms?
Yes, if you have put a date, a due date, and you can put your payment terms on the invoices as well. You should. Sometimes if you have a contract in place anyway, then it is already in some kind of service agreement that you have in place. But you can put it on your invoice as well.
Perfect. Then actually a little bit in brief, their addresses, your address, your bank details, and the description of the goods or the service you're selling, right?
Absolutely. And also remember to put the amounts and the rates and amounts that you're
Of course.
paid.
Yeah, and then we mentioned that you can issue it with a software or with Excel or Word, doesn't matter. If there is a mistake, it's better to issue a credit note and reissue a reissued invoice.
Yeah.
If they pay you cash on hand, you issue the invoice anyway later when you arrive at home.
Yeah.
And let's see if there was another question I asked, the 20% VAT that need to be done only if you're registered VAT, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. So if somebody like me have learned it, there's possibility that a lot of our audience have learned it as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
That's good. And things can get more complicated when a business is VAT registered, depending on the services and the type of businesses. But maybe we can talk about those things at some other point.
With utter pleasure. Thank you, Reese,
Yeah.
and yeah, probably see you. This thing is becoming quite constituted, so I hope to see you very, very soon.
Lovely. Thank you very much,
Thank you
Paul.
so much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.